When the Nintendo Switch was first introduced into the marketplace, I think a lot of people started to think the same thought process that I had. When would the Nintendo Switch fully overtake the Nintendo 3DS? It seemed like Nintendo wasn't quite ready to kill off the 3DS alongside of the launch of the Nintendo Switch, which I guess made sense. The Nintendo 3DS was a very well-selling system. It had a great library of games, and it was very easy money when you looked at the 3DS library and, of course, the 2DS and 3DS consoles for Nintendo to generate income from it. But I think a lot of people got kind of tired for games being announced for the 3DS. The Nintendo Switch obviously was a portable system as well, and the fact that the system sales for the Nintendo Switch really started to take off, really started to put a grave look on the future of the Nintendo 3DS. And during the latest financial investors report, Nintendo was asked about future projects for the Nintendo 3DS, and they said that nothing is on the table. So essentially, the Nintendo 3DS is dead. It's had a great run though. It was such a great system, and really that's what I want to talk about in this video. I feel like I'm going to be doing a lot of subsequent 3DS videos in the upcoming weeks because I really enjoyed the 3DS library of games. But in this video, I just want to sort of focus on the last few months of the Nintendo 3DS's life cycle, why so many people wanted to see the Nintendo Switch overtake the 3DS, and then just share some of my initial 3DS experiences and thoughts, because I actually was a midnight adopter for the system and it was actually kind of a funny story. So that's what we're going to do in this video. We're going to take a trip down memory lane and talk about the 3DS. So sit back, relax, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and let's talk about how Nintendo has finally thrown the dirt on the 3DS casket.
Hey, RGT85. Hey, Sean.
Oh my God, it's Stevie Richards! So like I said, when the Nintendo Switch was introduced into the marketplace, a lot of people wanted to see the 3DS just sort of slow down a lot. Obviously, the Nintendo Switch's screen versus the 3DS's screen was night and day. The Switch's screen was so much clearer and crisper as opposed to the lower resolution on the 3DS that admittedly, if you played Nintendo Switch games, it was kind of hard to get back into 3DS games because of the lower resolution of the screen. But I definitely see why Nintendo wasn't ready to kill off the 3DS just quite yet, because the Nintendo Switch was kind of a gamble. Especially coming off of the failures of the Wii U, there was no real reason to think that this was going to be a massive success like it has been so far. It definitely had potential, it definitely had groundwork, but without strong games and strong system sales, it could have ended up a lot like the Wii U once again, putting Nintendo in a very interesting predicament. But as the Nintendo Switch started to see massive success and games were selling well for it, a lot of people just wanted the 3DS to phase out. The 3DS came out in 2011, and it had a very long and successful life cycle. But once you started to see some of the games over the past few months for the 3DS, you could definitely tell that Nintendo was shifting away from this system. You had games like WarioWare Gold, which was a new WarioWare game, which admittedly is a fun series. I really enjoy these games. There's always fun mini games, nods and references to older titles and franchises in Nintendo's library that maybe they're not ready to do a new game of, so I always enjoy these games. I think a game that a lot of people wanted to see come to the Nintendo Switch as opposed to the 3DS, of course, was Luigi's Mansion. Luigi's Mansion released late last year for the Nintendo 3DS, and a lot of people felt that that would have been a perfect game for the Nintendo Switch, and I was one of those people, but looking back on it, I kind of understand why this was a 3DS title now. You wanted to have some goodwill with 3DS owners, and this was a good way to sort of show that, hey, we're phasing out this system, but we're still going to give you some quality games, and we're still going to give you some fun experiences to check out. But looking at 2019's library for the Nintendo 3DS with first-party games, you could definitely see the writing was on the wall with this system. You had Mario and Luigi, Bowser's Inside Story, and Kirby's Extra Epic Yarn. Of course, Kirby's Extra Epic Yarn was the port of the Wii game, and you could definitely see that this was just sort of a sign of goodwill, saying, hey, we're not going to be putting a lot of time and effort into these projects, we're going to be making easier projects. And now Nintendo has pretty much said, we're done with the 3DS, and it really just sort of puts the dirt on the grave of the system. You don't even see many third-party companies really supporting the 3DS anymore. When you look at the future of the system, there's not many upcoming releases for the system. And I think, you know what, it was a great run for the 3DS. Like, the 3DS was such a cool system. I have so many fond memories of it, and like I said, I'm going to be doing subsequent videos on it, but I just want to give you guys some of my first thoughts when I think of the 3DS, because I actually remember getting this system at a midnight launch with my good buddy. So basically, we were sitting around, and our local Walmart was not not doing a midnight launch for the 3DS, and we were both big fans of the DS, so we were like, we gotta have this, man. We need this on day one. And there was a Walmart in a podunk-ass town about 30 minutes away that was going to do a midnight launch for the 3DS. So we hopped in his car and we went down there, and we were the only people there. Like, nobody really cared about the 3DS system, it seemed like, at launch, which was so weird to us because Nintendo handhelds were so awesome. So we hung around this Walmart, and I guess some of it has to do with the initial launch library of games for the 3DS, because honestly, the launch library was very, very weak. We didn't even pick up either of the Nintendo titles, being Steel Diver and Pilot Wings Resort, because I don't know, they just didn't seem like really fun games to us. We ended up getting Super Street Fighter 4 3D Edition and Ridge Racer because we were both big Street Fighter fans, and I remember really enjoying that version of the game. I did not like that it had the little touchscreen controls where you could do your special moves and combos. I thought that was kind of cheap, especially when you were playing online, but thankfully there was a mode where you could sort of play without that on there. And of course, Ridge Racer. Ridge Racer was always around for handheld systems and really launch systems back in the day. It was a racing game that would show you the power of the system and sort of show you the future of this system. And I remember driving back, I actually drove his car back. He had a Cadillac and he had just put 20s on it. It was like pouring down rain. There was no street lights. I couldn't see a damn thing, but we were hauling ass because we wanted to get home and play some 3DS stuff. Of course, the 3DS was supposed to do a lot of stuff with augmented reality. You had the AR cards that Nintendo just pretty much forgot about that. And I really sort of liked the AR cards. It seemed like it was sort of a glimpse into the future of what the system could really bring to the table. Of course, the initial 3D on the 3DS systems wasn't really all that great. It was cool, it was interesting, but you definitely had to get a proper angle in order to hold it up to your face to really get the sort of 3D experience. Of course, the launch of the Nintendo 3DS was very soft, and subsequent months, you didn't see many games coming to the system, and this, of course, created the ambassador program for 3DS owners. Nintendo sort of gave a thank you for having to wait so long for great games to come to the system from them by giving you a bunch of retro games for free, and I always thought that was a very nice gesture. Like, it was cool. They really didn't have to do something like that. Obviously, Nintendo wasn't quite sure what they were doing with this system when it first came out, but it was definitely a nice gesture that they were kind enough to do something like that and give you some free games to play. Of course, the 3DS had a great virtual console library. They really had a great variety of games, a great variety of systems. Not as great as the Wii, but for a handheld, you really got a lot of different stuff on there. I remember there being some really good fighting games on the system as well, especially towards the launch of the system. Aside from Street Fighter, you also had a version of Tekken and a version of Dead or Alive on the system, and it was weird because these came out very early in the system's life cycle, and you never really saw any other fighting games aside from Smash Brothers come along that were, you know, fighting games. So I always thought that was very interesting. Third parties were definitely kind of weird with the Nintendo 3DS in the early cycle of the system. You saw things like Madden show up once, and then that was it. You never really got many sports titles on the system, which I always thought was a bit of a missed opportunity. You know, maybe sports titles didn't sell all that great on the DS, but with the added power of the 3DS, you might could have done something pretty special with it. One thing I also remember about the 3DS is just the great remasters of N64 games. You had The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, you had The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, and you had Star Fox 64 3D. Three excellent titles that were definitely stuck in the N64 era, and adding in these 3D visuals and of course these higher resolution textures for the 3DS really made these games stand out, and definitely games that stood the test of time. They're games that I could play at any point in time and definitely enjoy them and have a really good time with them. So I always loved the, you know, the N64 remasters that they did on the 3DS, and I always kind of wish they would have expanded upon that and done more N64 games on the 3DS, because of course 3DS games were much cheaper than home console games. You know, 30 or 40 bucks you get a brand new 3DS game, whereas opposed to you're paying $60 for a brand new home console title. So that was really an interesting market for Nintendo because they could charge cheaper on software. You had revived Nintendo franchises. You had Kid Icarus, which nobody had seen in forever. Admittedly, I wasn't even a huge fan of the original Kid Icarus game, but I really enjoyed it on the 3DS. It really brought the series to life. It brought Pit back into the limelight, really sort of created him as a character and made him more valuable in games like Smash Brothers, I feel. So I really enjoyed that. Of course, you had a new Luigi's Mansion game. You had The Legend of Zelda, A Link Between Worlds. A lot of companies did a lot of interesting things, especially Nintendo, when it came to the 3DS. The 3DS's library is just a beast when it comes to JRPGs JRPGs. There's so many different JRPGs on the system. You got Dragon Quests, you got Final Fantasies, and I just really enjoyed the variety of the system. You had big third-party titles like Resident Evil and Resident Evil Revelations. You had Metal Gear Solid 3, sort of bringing back some older stuff that you hadn't seen on a Nintendo platform in quite a while. And like I said, there's going to be subsequent videos on this channel about the 3DS library, getting more in depth, but these are just the first things that sort of pop into my head when I think of the 3DS and the initial system. Of course, I did get a new 3DS the day that it came out as well, because I needed that little analog nub. You saw revisions like the 2DS, which was a cheaper option that got rid of the 3D. Of course, the new 3DS actually had better 3D on the system and made 3D actually worth using, but I feel like the 3D portion and the AR portion was, at the end of the day, just sort of a gimmick. You know, 3D stuff never really took off. VR is still trying to get its foothold, so I feel like it was an interesting thing to try. I feel like it was something that could have had a future, but unfortunately, it just seemed like the technology wasn't quite there with the 3DS. But like I said, those are just some of the things that pop into my mind when I think of the 3DS. I know this video is kind of all over the place, but it's sort of what I wanted to do. Just sort of give a little send-off to the Nintendo 3DS, because I have so many fond memories of the system. I have a great library of 3DS games, and 3DS games are probably going to start going down in price. You'll probably be seeing systems selling for very cheap as well. So if you haven't gotten into the system yet, I feel like now is a great time. So let me know in the comment section down below what your thoughts are on the 3DS. Did you enjoy the system? And are you sad to see it go now that Nintendo has pretty much killed the system? And as always, guys, thank you for checking out this video. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Check out other videos on the channel. And as always, I'll catch you guys on the next one. Later.